talk to you a little bit about floodplain mapping. Mike's working on a red book. We're going to talk jointly about some hydrology issues in the county, and I guess anything else that comes to our mind. Okay, a little bit about the Maumee River Basin Commission. A lot of you got gray hair like I do, and you probably remember the 1978 and 82 floods. Well, after those two big floods, there was a lot of discussion amongst county officials in Adams, Allen, and DeKalb counties that flooding was not just a Fort Wayne issue. It was a regional issue, and the folks in the upstream area really needed to take some responsibility for their water coming downstream. And so that catalyst led to a lot of discussion with a lot of the local legislators. And in 1986, or actually it was 1985, former state representative Mitch Harper was one of the key legislators, and former state representative Phyllis Pond. They helped introduce legislation that created the Maumee River Basin Commission. And so after we were created, we had to work on some consensus building. Now I mentioned we already had Adams, Allen, DeKalb had already coalesced, but we still had 3 other counties that were needed to be brought in. And initially, without too much fanfare, Noble and Steuben County, they accepted responsibility and became active partners. Wells County chose to opt out, and then I should tell you, back during this time, I was county surveyor for Noble County. So I sat on the board as a board member back then. And then I became director in '96. Well, in 1998, Wells County, they saw some of the good efforts that the Maumee River Basin Commission had accomplished, and they came on board. So now all 6 of the counties are represented on the board. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Mike, you want to share this part?
Sure. Rod, I can just talk. I'll just project. I was a coach for a while, so you know that always helps. Each county is represented by up to 3 of their county commissioners, the county surveyors, and a soil and water conservation district board member. And so for Allen County, I am at every meeting as the county surveyor. Bill Hartman is representing the Allen County Commissioners, and Bill is the highway director in Allen County, and then Greg Lake is at every meeting as well. The work that the MRBC does is very important to the whole watershed. And so we have a group that gets together that's super knowledgeable. Again, Rod's been director for well over 20 years and has done many great projects in the whole watershed, benefit everybody. And so it's important that we're represented, that we really diligently look at all possible projects and whether they fit into our master plan and whether that's an effective use of our resources. And so it's a great group that meets together to help all of you. And so Rod leads us in these endeavors and does a great job.
The next slide here, I'm not going to go through all these, but they just list some of we focus on non-structural flood mitigation. Back in early 1990s, there was an effort to put in the Fort Wayne Diking project. So I don't get out of the room, I won't tell you my feelings on that project. We'll just leave that alone. But we do not condone or advocate dikes and levees. We like to do non-structural approach. We're probably most noted for our home acquisitions. We've acquired somewhere between 300 and 400 homes, watershed wide. And by removing those structures out of the flood hazard area, we're opening that floodplain back up for additional floodwater storage. So with that, we're going to go on. You want to share this with Mike?
This just goes to how much. Again, we have lots of projects to think about. This is a recent one. A couple years ago, in the state legislature, in the DNR bill, at the last minute, the DNR slid something in there. I'll just project, Rod. That required reviewers that they shall use the DNR baffle layer, the best available flood layer. Okay, and mandated it above FEMA maps and everything else. Well, I'm not sure who came up with that, but it wasn't a very wise move. And so now that's been revised in the last legislative session. As an engineer who reviews all development in the county, and our county is huge. It's the largest geographic county in the state at over 660 square miles, which, if you multiply that out, that's about 422,000 acres in our county. Our disturbed acreage, we're going through a very high time of development, but even so, we're disturbing on the average a little over 1,000 acres a year. Last year, I think it was 1,119 of land disturbing activities for residential development, commercial development, industrial development, and we're, as a county surveyor in Allen County, we're reviewing that. And we're making sure that we do a diligent professional review for water quantity, okay, to make sure people don't flood, okay, that we know where those flood waters are going, that they're going away from structures and away from people. And that's all being thought through very, very diligently through hydraulic and hydrologic analysis. But that legislation that said we shall use the baffle, that's not the end-all be-all with information. It has to be one of the tools that we use. And we found out with the DNR baffle layer that there were areas that didn't make sense, that weren't logical. We ran that into the subdivision that was being developed at the time, that it said now it was all in the floodplain, even though we had no history of flooding in the last 50 years. But somehow it appeared in the floodplain, and then we had to work through that. So there were errors, and it was based on how they modeled. The DNR modeled the area. The land in eastern Allen County is very flat. I think it's so flat that some of those approximate modeling methods just don't work. They're not accurate. And so to that end, the MRBC is contracted with Christopher Burke to the tune of a contract that's a little over $300,000 there, $360,000 to analyze 6 or 7 streams or so in eastern Allen County so that we can do detailed hydrologic and hydraulic analysis to find a better model, more accurate model than what the baffle layer is providing us. And so Rod has really spearheaded this, and as the county surveyor, I'm trying to help as much as we can to get this area classified the way it should be classified, right? Because we don't want a bunch of area in the floodplain that's not really in the floodplain, so that people have to pay flood insurance that they might, maybe they shouldn't have to pay. Okay, and so we're working through those issues, all right? So Rod has got that project going. And again, when you do hydrologic modeling, it's watershed area. From a quantity side of it, we require detention basins. We require acceptable outfalls to streams that can take the water, right? And we have an acceptable release rate, 0.18 CFS per acre for our release rate out of our basins. The storm management pipes have to be to a 10-year event, right? And so they have to be able to hold a 10-year storm. The detention basins have to be able to hold a 100-year storm. A 100-year storm today, by NOAA's calculations online, is a 5.73 inch depth in a 24-hour period of rain. Okay, so that's a 100-year event for Fort Wayne right now. A decade ago, a 100-year event was a 5.70 inch rain. So we are getting, more water, okay, which, again, the basin concept and holding the 100-year event and then having an emergency overflow pathway to take the water in the excess of a 100-year event, past structures, away from people, that's all planned out, well planned, right? Well engineered. I think the thing that concerns me when we talk about climate change and increasing intensity is not so much like we're going to have a bigger individual storm, but that they may be more frequent. Our basins that hold the 100-year event are required to recover 90% of their storage over 48 hours. Again, if another event comes within that 48 hours, the basin could be overwhelmed, right? We could have a 50-year event, a 25-year event back to back, and it could overwhelm the 100-year basin. And so the frequency is something that I'll be looking at to see how that might impact us. We need to be proactive. We need to plan. And so to that extent, Rod has started this study with Burke. I've started a large study. I like to have visual aids a little bit, but this is the red book. It is the 1972 master plan for Allen County. It is a wonderful document. We still use pieces of this today. It was well put together for 1972. But no one has done an updated study in 50 years. You know, so as I've been surveyor for 16 months, I've tried to clean up a lot and get a lot of initiatives going, section corners and so forth, and regulated drain maintenance and all this kind of stuff. But this overall plan for our community, this needs to be redone, right? It's been 50 years, and we're the largest county in the state with third most population. We should be at the forefront of some of this planning, and we certainly are not. Entered into discussions with the support of the county commissioners, entered into discussions with the Army Corps, with Fort Wayne City Utilities, with the MRVC, with experts from the outside, hydraulic experts from Burke that have a tremendous reputation in this state for the work that they do. And so we began those discussions about maybe 6 months ago. Probably in the next few months, we're going to sign agreements with the Army Corps to do phase 1 of a 4-phase study of the whole county. That will probably take about 5 years to do. We'll analyze every watershed in this county. We'll have developed watershed-specific release rates so we know how much water we can send to a stream. We go by a blanket release rate now, which might be more than a stream can take, might be less than a stream can take. It's just an average. And so I don't think, me being the logical person that I am, don't think that's the best way to go, all right? So as we have modern surveying data and modern analysis techniques hydraulically, we're going to come up, the Army Corps through their study, working with our consultants and our local experts with watershed-specific release rates. So if an area develops, we know what that downstream or what that stream can take that we're sending the water to. So hopefully we'll have those agreements done in the next few months to do phase 1. And again, phase 1 is about $450,000. All 4 phases will be about $3 million. The federal government, through the Army Corps, they already have that money. If we don't use it, other communities will. And the federal government will pay half of that. The city of Fort Wayne believes that this is a great initiative as well. I've partnered with city utilities. They are going to pay 25%, and the county is going to pay 25%. In fact, in this first phase, I've committed surveyor funds to cover the county's expense. In future phases, I'll have to come to council and say, this is a great thing. Hopefully you can support it. We are going to be going into, shortly, into a 5-year project to do a new stormwater master plan for the entire county that will hopefully, I don't know if it'll last 50 years like this one, but will last well beyond the time that Rod and I are here in our roles. And that's a wonderful thing for the community. We quantified last year, for the first time that I could find in the surveyor records, the actual assets that we have with our regulated drain system. It's over 1,450 miles of regulated tiles and ditches in this county. A little over 780 miles of open ditches that I certified as a professional engineer to the county executive. It says that in the drainage code. I don't believe an Allen County Surveyor has done that in the history of the office. And so we're going from that, certifying, knowing exactly what we have, and then going to a drain classification list that needs to be provided to the drainage board. The drainage code says from time to time, hasn't been really provided for 20 years. And then a long-range plan off of that. So that, and then we'll execute the plan. I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent there.
Well, Mike said that he likes to educate, and I'd like to educate just a little bit. I went back one slide for a reason. But there was a lot of areas, a lot of drains that had never been studied. So there was no floodplain identified. And one of our objectives from the River Basin Commission is we want to make sure that you know that potential risk. Because I shared with you earlier, we bought between 300 and 400 homes. Well, I don't want to go buying a $400,000 or $500,000 home because that's coming out of your taxpayers' dollars. So if we can prevent those homes from being built in those high-risk areas, that's again, being prevented. So I'll put this back up here because this is what prompted the legislature to get involved. We have a floodplain map that by IDNR that was done by approximate methodologies, and it's very, very wide. So I'm going to start the conversation with that. And this next slide, there's three things that are highlighted in yellow. Watershed area, watershed slope, and the rainfall data, local rainfall data. Well, why are those highlighted in yellow? Well, because we can very accurately determine what the watershed area is. We can very accurately determine the slope in the watershed. We can also very accurately, because of the rainfall data that we're recording, we know what that is. But then when we get to these other variables, we have land use. Now, some people may argue land use, I openly admit, with the GIS, Graphic Information Systems, we can much more accurately determine what the land use area is today than what we could 20 years ago. But it's still somewhat subjective. Soil types, rainfall depths, I won't read through them all, but every one of those things up there are subjective. And keep that in mind when we're trying to determine the amount of rainfall that's falling in a watershed and heading towards a water source. So then we go, once we determine what that amount of rainfall is, or the volume of water running off into the drain, then we put it into a hydraulic model. Again, I highlighted two things in yellow, the channel slope and the channel cross sections. Now, we take pride in the fact that, as Mike said, we spent and committed over $360,000 because we're working with the County Surveyor's office to actually do field survey cross sections. LIDAR can be very, very accurate. In fact, Allen County's got some pretty good LIDAR data. So we knew it wasn't the LIDAR. My background, Mike's background, hydrology, we knew that the issue was the discharge or the hydrology in the watershed. So when the DNR goes through and they're creating these maps, they're doing everything in an approximate method. So it's by guess, by golly, to be honest with you. We don't operate that way. We want to be very definitive, and we want the most accurate data that we can provide. So that's what we're doing here. And when we create floodplain maps, again, back to the best modeling that we can do, we have to have the most accurate discharge. And if you're putting in the wrong discharge, you're going to create those really, really wide floodplains. And that's what's happening here in eastern Allen County. I always like to go through this slide real quick and get back to Mike's comment about educating folks. The floodplain is actually divided into two sections. You have the floodway, or some folks call it the regulatory floodway. That's the area that's the actual trapezoidal channel, and then the area over the overbank that's required to convey the 1% annual chance flood. Some folks know that as the 100-year flood. Then from that point out to the outer limits of the floodplain, that's called the floodway fringe. The floodway is controlled by the state IDNR, not local. The floodway fringe is controlled by your local planning and zoning department. So we also work with them, trying to make sure that development is not squeezing and encroaching into that floodplain. In Indiana, our floodways are determined a little more restrictive than what the federal standard is. Through modeling efforts, you can just picture if you got a flood and you're trying to squeeze all that water into that channel. We build two walls, we bring them in, and where the water surface bumps up 1/1400ths, okay, just shy of 2 inches, that is what determines the floodway boundary in Indiana. That's not a local regulation, that's a state regulation. At the federal level, they allow 1 foot rise. So their floodways are much more narrower than what ours are. That's a good thing for us, because again, it keeps people from developing in that floodway. I'd just like to go over that. And Mike, if you want, I'll advance the slides if you want to highlight the ditches that we're looking at. Not every one that we show is going to be addressed in this 360,000, because we had to start somewhere, and we chose 7 streams that were impacting residential structures, commercial structures, and those are the streams we're going to highlight first. And then our objective is eventually to clean up all of these maps.
Yeah, do the model correctly. One thing, we have Interceptor, this one is the Killian Ditch, up Antwerp Road, Amstutz Ditch, Rotterdam Ditch, by State Road 17.
And you can just see how wide these floodplains are.
Yeah, they're super wide because of their approximate modeling method. So they're not accurate. It needs to be field surveyed and analyzed differently. This Litzenberg Ditch.
What's unique about that one, Mike? I probably
Don't put me on the spot.
unique is here. The fact that we're along the state line.
Yeah, state line.
Again, a very unique feature here. You got that interceptor drain, and so when you try to look at a watershed and you see that there's a straight line, man, that's a red flag right away. So, I didn't mean to.
No, it's fine. The state line is interesting. Ohio doesn't tend to want to work well with us, so they want us to keep our own water, but we're working on those relationships. So Renkenberger ditch and then Maumee ditch. And kind of see, like Rod said, Martin ditch, Lamont ditch, you can see how that floodplain is just very, very wide now with the DNR approximate modeling. So again, continuing on, Morgan White ditch, and Maumee that we talked about earlier.
Okay, can I take this one?
Yes, you can.
Okay, why do I put this one up here? Why do we do this? Now, I don't want to deceive anybody by making you think that every situation ends up in a good news story. Because sometimes there's winners and sometimes there's losers. But this is a good example of the top picture is an old flood map, and it mirrors what the IDNR best available flood layer was, or is. The bottom layer represents the Maumee River Basin Commission, working with the Allen County Surveyor's Office. We ended up doing a very detailed flood insurance study and remodeling the Hoffman Drain and the Flat Rock Creek. And can you see the stark difference in the floodplains?
Huge difference in the floodplain.
It is huge. What does that mean? From a county council perspective, that means the assessed value of that property just went straight up, because it has a much higher value than what it did when it was all blue. From a development standpoint, your property's worth a lot more if it's not floodplain. So what we're trying to do is make sure everybody's on a level playing field. If your property's in a flood zone, we want you to know it. But we don't want your property mapped as floodplain if it's not really floodplain. And so we're striving for that accuracy. So I mentioned, what would you do if you're a county surveyor? Well, we investigate, right, Mike? And so we hired a local engineering firm to like the drone footage presentation that was immediately before us. We actually took drone footage with LiDAR and started going downstream. And as we suspected, there's a lot of log jams. And I can keep going down. We got more log jams, more, and we can keep going. So what we're doing now is, Greg and I have met with Chris Crabtree, when he works with Congressman Jim Banks' office, because for whatever reason, we can't quite break that communication dialogue with our Ohio partners. Because the concern is that, well, if you take all these log jams out, we're going to flood out Payne and Baldy. Well, I'm sorry, but hydrology don't quite work that way. And so all I can do is leave you with this, that Mike and I and Greg, we all work together very, very well. We need to keep these guys in their positions, and we're going to troubleshoot this and resolve it at least before I retire. So, Mike?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would close with is that Greg has been really good at trying to reach out. I think in the past 25 years, but certainly in the past 6 years, there hasn't been a lot of participation by the Allen County Surveyor to work with Soil and Water Conservation District partner, like we did when we went to the Flat Rock Watershed meeting, and you talk about the bank stabilization grant you were going for, and whether we could help that and match whatever you could get. And I said, well, I did my research first to know we could, but then offered that up, and I want to look for those partnering opportunities so that we can make our money go farther in terms of helping in these different endeavors that we both know are important. So I think I'm trying to do that. Hopefully, Greg, you feel that way, and we'll keep the momentum going so that we're all working together and not in our silos so much as has been in the past. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, that wraps up the 2024 Allen County SWCD annual meeting. Want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. One, two, thank all of our speakers this morning, all of our elected officials that came out, partner groups, and also want to give a big thank you to the district staff for putting this together and getting this breakfast ready for everybody this morning, and to the Roricks for hosting us. So if we could get one big round of applause